Did you know that after the heart stops beating, the brain keeps functioning for well over 7 minutes? Huh. We got 6 more minutes to play.
Nightmare on Elm Street is a franchise loved by many. I would say it falls flat after Dream Warriors, but that's just me. But in regards to the series, people ignore something pretty big about it. It had a remake, like most horror movie franchises do nowadays. Remakes are impossible to avoid, but people really try their hardest to avoid this one. Almost all the reviews I've seen online have been negative towards the remake. Is it really that bad? Well, let's compare the remake to the original, and see where things went right, and see where things went wrong. Let's start with the original.
Nightmare on Elm Street.
Published by New Line Cinema, which at the time was a very small distributor. Also written and directed by Wes Craven, one of horror genre's best writers. It's one psychological horror film done right. It plays with a lot of surrealist themes, but later films would just become kill focus and campy fun and a betrayal to the first film.
Kids.
The entire film is slow, going through a more realistic approach before we go into the madness of the dreams and some slight fourth wall breaking moments. Along with all this, we get some great practical effects thrown in there too. These effects still look great by today. With a budget of roughly $2 million or less, they did a pretty good job in filming. They mostly used the budget for more practical effects and set pieces, such as the rotating room which they used for Glenn and Tina's death scenes. The cast is pretty good. Not many of them are well known though, except for Johnny Depp, which at the time of filming wasn't even a popular actor. The characters seem to be a bit stereotypical, like you would see in a typical horror movie, but they hold it pretty well still. Nancy, our female lead, played by Heather Langenkamp, is described in the script as a pretty girl in a leather sweater with an easy athletic stride and the look of a leader. We can certainly see this in the original, especially with Nancy making traps and fighting Freddy later on. She is a little weak at the start, but you can definitely see her becoming the leader type. Freddy is played quite campy in the original. Both the original and remake version of him play with their victims, Robin Englund's Freddy being a bit more lighter than Jackie Earle Haley's Freddy. The original plan was to have Freddy as what he is in the remake, a child molester. But at the time of shooting, the McMartin trial was going on. This refers to the child molestation trial of Raymond Bucky and his mother Peggy, as they were accused of raping, sodomizing, and terrorizing children. I'll leave a link to the whole story in my description. Due to this, they dodged the idea in the original film, but it was picked up and experimented more in the remake. We have to now talk about the remake. Once again published by New Line Cinema, directed by Samuel Bayer and written by Wesley Strick and Eric Hezia, also produced by Michael Bay. Yeah, that Michael Bay. This film still plays to the psychological aspect of the original, but it has more of a dramatic and edgy flair to it. With a budget of roughly $35 million or more, this film has less practical effects and more CGI. The CGI is helped in a few places, but it hasn't aged well, or at least some of it hasn't aged well. I believe the newer and darker Freddy is just as good. He's different, which is a good thing, because if we got the same old campy Freddy as before, people would complain. So I'm glad they took the risk and made him much darker. He also has some really good one-liners, like this one.
You really shouldn't fall asleep in class.
The story has changed a bit, so we aren't following a shot-by-shot remake. This plays with our expectations and is what a remake should consider when being filmed and created. Saying that, the remake does recreate some iconic scenes from the original, some being the exact same and some looking worse. Much worse. Remember what I said about the CGI? Oh Jesus Christ. The idea in the original to why we follow Tina for a bit is to set up that maybe she could be the main protagonist of the film, but then she dies. In this remake, Tina is now called Chris, and she's probably the best thing of this film. They try that tactic again and they kill her off. I was actually kind of sad to see her killed off. Katie Cassidy acted really well. Compared to the first film though, her death really isn't as well done as it is in the original. The original death scene is much more uncomfortable and shot really well. There's this sense of dread that lingers in the scene and really gets under your skin. This scene is just her flying like a playing toy in a kid's arms.
Wake up!
The rest of the cast do a good enough job. The characters are decent enough for the film, but fall more into the stereotypical characters that we would see in the slasher film. Remember what I said about Nancy earlier? Well, she's a lot more toned down in this film too. The build up to her getting her strength to fight Freddy, it's just not the same as the original. In this remake, it feels less rewarding. This was probably due to the writing. I mean, Nancy does seem like a very different character in this film too. She's much more of a cool girl. The original Nancy seemed more like a kind of good girl kind of role. This is why I mentioned Nancy earlier. She's had the most change, along with Glenn, now called Quentin, who seems to be more of a coward than he was before. The changes to keep certain characters alive and put characters in different places though feels really good. The idea to explore Freddy's backstory is interesting. It was also a good choice to have some scenes including the actions of the parents when they killed Freddy. In everyone's eyes, the films are different, especially how the story is told. The original being more lighter compared to the remake, which is obviously more darker. At least the remake isn't falsely advertised. It tells you exactly what you're gonna get. A darker take on the original, which is what we got. Little things though, like the opening to this remake, it's not as good as the original film. Also, I don't remember the music for this remake. But the original, however, no one's gonna forget the music to the original.
From Wes Craven, director of The Hills Have Eyes and Last House on the Left, a new masterpiece in fantasy terror, Nightmare on Elm Street.
The original Nightmare on Elm Street will always be in people's hearts, but this remake has some cool moments too, such as this scene.
Every opinion they saw, even children, especially the children of souls. This is where the
Wake up. Wake up, wake up, wake up.
I feel like the alternate ending was better though. You can watch it online, but I'm not sure what people think about it. Overall, I respect the remake for trying some things new, and being what Nightmare on Elm Street could have been if the original plan was implemented. Despite some dated CGI and some practical effects, the remake experiments with more ideas like microsleeps, but still includes great things like Freddy's one-liners, some locations, ideas, and uses more of the backstory for Freddy. Even if some people can't stand this film, these points should still be considered.